So give us that overview of how did it begin from Naxalbari, how did it reach the peaks it did before we kind of dive into what's happening right now with India's fight against and mission to end it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dev, good question and great to be back. Now, the thing is that you have to understand the thing about Naxalism or Maoism, whatever you call it, Left Wing Extremism, is that this is an ideology. You know, it is not something about peasants who are being discriminated, suddenly, picked up arms and challenged the might of the state. All of this can be traced back to the revolutions in Russia and in China, specifically China, because the Maoists in India are actually more heavily influenced by Mao Zedong, what he did in China in the 20s and the 30s, and finally captured power in China in 1948. He expelled the nationalists and the Chinese Communist Party still rules.
I want your perspective of what you've seen over the course of your career in terms of how important was the politics of it all to this movement, and perhaps the mistakes we made because of the politics of it all.
Well, I think the biggest mistake, if you ask me, Dev, was that we began economic liberalization so late in the day. And it should have happened much before, which probably have been in the 70s. You probably wouldn't have even seen the Maoist movement.
When in the US, when you have a protest happening in Los Angeles, where the US president has ordered Marines, which is one of the four arms of the US military, to be deployed in the city to quell those protests. So what do you think would have happened if we had also done this?
Well, I mean, we're very different from the Americans. Right. And secondly, I mean, like I said before, one of the best things that the military did was to stay out of this conflict. They said, look, it's not our battle. Do not deploy us for this. We are not meant for fighting insurgencies in the heartland.
What people sometimes argue the US has done when it comes to Islamic terrorism, because the kind of bombing they've carried out, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq, that's kind of led to that sentiment staying and led to more radicalization.
Well, the US is up against ideologies again, and they've not won any war, if you look at it. Even the after Gulf Storm 1, which was in 1991, the US has never won any war. Look what happened in Afghanistan, where you went in to destroy Al-Qaeda, and then you ended up fighting the Taliban, and then you ended up, into nation building, which was never your original goal, and you ended up staying there for 20 years, and all you did was to replace Taliban 1.0 with Taliban 2.0. It's as crazy as that.
Every other day you have an encounter where you have X number of Naxals being either killed or, surrender or being arrested. If it was so easy, then what was making it so difficult in the past?
Well, the fact is that the presence of the security forces has gone up enormously.
Among them was the General Secretary of CPI Maoist, Basavaraju.
Yeah.
Want to focus only on this person right now before we expand into the larger fight against Naxalism. This, the government of India said, was the biggest kill in the last 30 years. Why?
The first time that a Maoist chief has been killed.
When it comes to fighting cadres of Naxalism, when it comes to fighting a unit of Naxalites, what is it like for the troops who are engaged in it? How dangerous is it, and how does it compare, when I said, to a normal army operation?
No, very good question, Dev. And my sense is that it's the way the Maoists fight. They train like regular militaries.
Welcome to Inner Defense. India's borders, whether along with China or Pakistan, are relatively quiet for the last couple of weeks. But there's a war that's raging inside. A war that's been raging for over 5 decades now. Naxalism, Maoism, Red Terror, leftist extremism, you call it whatever. This all fits into what the government of India officially calls left-wing extremism. And the government of India has said that this left-wing extremism will be eliminated by March 2026. A funny deadline to have. It's like the end of the financial end of the quarter sort of a thing. But what we've seen in the last few weeks is a spurt, last few months actually, is a spurt in encounters that's led to surrenders of several Naxalites or eliminations in encounters. And to sort of decode that and help us understand what's happening right now in the war against left-wing extremism and what's been happening in the last few years and what we can expect in the upcoming months is with me, Sandeep Unnithan. Hi Sandeep, how are you?
Hey Dev, good to be back.
Once again, a topic I think, Sandeep, that you must have spent almost your entire career covering in bits and pieces, if I'm not wrong.
Well, parts of my career, but a substantial part of my
Substantial
career.
part of
Yeah,
your career, because I think the problem is such. The
yeah,
problem that India has faced with this is such. And that's exactly why I'm going to actually ask you to give us a crash course into the history of
yeah.
left-wing extremism in India. Because we were discussing this just before we began recording. You met me in the cafeteria downstairs
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
asked me whether this topic gets a lot of traction online. And when we in the media talk traction, what we mean basically is whether we get readers' interest into subject matters like these.
Yeah.
And I said that honestly speaking, it's not as much as you would expect with some other very, very popular topics for many obvious reasons that the two of us know about. So, which is exactly why I want you to sort of explain to our listeners and viewers what is left-wing extremism, how it sort of took shape and evolved. Uh, Now I know it began in West Bengal, northern West Bengal, in a village called Naxalbari, which
Naxalbari.
is where the
Yeah.
word Naxalism comes from. Naxalbari, which was basically a farmers' movement, a farmers' uprising. How did we start from there? Which was, if I'm not wrong, in 1967
Yeah.
to decades later, where you had what was known as the Red Corridor that spanned West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, parts of
More
Jharkhand.
than a dozen Indian states.
Exactly, yeah. So, give us that overview of how did it begin from Naxalbari? How did it reach the peaks it did before we kind of dive into what's happening right now
Yeah.
with India's fight against and mission to end it?
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, good question and great to be back. Now, the thing is that you have to understand the thing about Naxalism or Maoism, whatever you call it, left wing extremism, is that this is an ideology. You know, it is not something about peasants who are being discriminated, suddenly, picked up arms and challenged the might of the state. All of this can be traced back to the revolutions in Russia and in China, specifically China, because the Maoists in India are actually more heavily influenced by Mao Zedong, what he did
Yes.
in China in the 20s and the 30s, and finally captured power in China in 1948. He expelled the nationalists, and the Chinese Communist Party still rules. Until some time, the Chinese were actively supporting all of these revolutionary movements all across the world. And you had all of these leftist guerrilla, movements. Whether it's Shining Path in South America, you have the Philippines red movements there in Cambodia. So all of these are actually all far left militant groups who advocate the overthrow of the ruling government. And this is also what the Maoists of India plan to do when they began their insurrection in West Bengal, Naxalbari, as you mentioned. The plan was to overthrow the state and to establish red rule, exactly the way Chairman Mao had done. And so it is an ideology, and this ideology has remained in one form or the other. Now, it's come in several waves. Now, you had these movements in Telangana in 1946 when you had an uprising. There were genuine reasons for that. The kind of oppression of the villagers and all was. But it was pretty devastating for people over there in what was then the Nizam's territories, 1946, where you had Peasants Uprisings and a lot of, communist movements were across the countryside in India. One of, like I mentioned, in Telangana, you had in West Bengal. Kerala, of course, they formed a government there. So that, you can say, the revolutionary power was converted into electoral power. And it was an unusual thing that you had the first communist government in Kerala in using an elected democracy, parliamentary democracy to come to power. But you had all of these little fringe movements in the countryside flickering in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh. Of course, Andhra Pradesh was undivided in those days. And then West Bengal. The uprising in Naxalbari in 1967 was crushed very brutally by the force of the state. By 1972, it was completely wiped out. It was the government, it was the police, the paramilitary, and even the Indian army. Not much is spoken about this. But the fact is that the Indian army did not want, while it was focused on East Pakistan, did not want this insurgency in its backyard.
Wow, okay.
So which is why I have spoken with General Jacob, who was then the Chief of Staff of the Eastern Command. And he said that they proceeded to act against the Maoists, the Naxals, with brute force. And that uprising was crushed brutally. And then in 2004, what you have is all of these remaining groups, which is the Maoist Communist Center in Bihar, the People's War Group of Andhra Pradesh, who was a complete die-hard leftist Maoist revolutionaries. They met somewhere in the middle, in the jungles of Chhattisgarh. And they formed this party called the CPI Maoists, Communist Party of India Maoists. And lo and behold, they started controlling large tracts of land in areas where the state was absent, completely missing, like in the forests of Dantewada and Chhattisgarh. You have this place called Abujmad, which means impenetrable forest, like 4,000 kilometers of forest, which have never been surveyed, even in the times of the British. It is completely unsurveyed territories, and all of the Maoists went there and they established their bastions there. And lo and behold, by 2006, just 2 years after this unification of all of these fringe groups into the CPI Maoists, you had what was called the Red Corridor, stretching from Nepal right down to Andhra Pradesh. Yeah. So they used to call it the Pashupati to Tirupati corridor. Wow. Almost a dozen Indian states, and it was also called a compact revolutionary zone, which allowed for free movement of men and material across this corridor. It was literally like a corridor, an expressway for the Maoists to move freely. And they controlled, at that point, more than 150 Indian districts. They had a presence in all of these districts, right? Out of the 600 or so Indian districts, they control almost 100, 150. They had a presence in all of these districts. They were very strong. They had a guerrilla army of more than 10,000 cadres. That's almost a division-sized force. And, when I was here in India today, in 2010, we received the most blood-chilling account of a massacre in Dantewada, in Chhattisgarh, where an entire company of the CRPF were massacred. Now, a company is 100 plus troopers. 76 of them were murdered. They were encircled by the Maoists, who came in large numbers, thousands. So they had these fighting formations, which they used to call the battalions, which are actually companies. But they could amass, and they moved like regular militaries. They were not like guerrillas in that sense. They would mobilize, they would move, march, encircle this, and they encircled an entire CRPF company and they massacred them with utter brutality. I remember, flying down there, we went there, it took us almost a day to reach that place where the survivors were pulled out. There were just about 8 survivors from that massacre. And most of them were shaking when they were describing this thing of literally hundreds of Maoists converging and, literally shooting them like, hens in a coop. They were encircled, surrounded and killed. So that was the military power of the Maoists at their peak, somewhere in the mid-2010s, which is just about 6 years after they'd formed the CPI Maoists. And you had none other than the Prime Minister of India, that's Manmohan Singh, in 2006, April 2006, I still remember that, where he says that they are the gravest internal security problem for India. And at that time, let's not forget, Dev, you had a situation in Jammu and Kashmir, a very active situation there. You had militancy, you had cross-border terrorism. We were 2 years away from Mumbai, but you already had a couple of very high-profile attacks in Mumbai, 93 and, of course, 2006. And here was the Prime Minister saying that, look, they are the biggest internal security threat. And in a sense, they were far more potent because they are what is called a heartland insurgency, which is in the heart of your country. In the middle of India. They're not a rimland insurgency, which is something around the borders, which you can, you can contain, you can put your military there, you can, seal the border. What do you do with an insurgency that's burning in the middle of your country? So those were very dark times then, where we actually thought it's going to take a while to get all of this under control. And this was in areas where, like I mentioned, the state had no presence. There was no one going there. There were no surveyors there. There were no roads. There was no electricity. There was nothing. So this was the void that the Maoists chose to incubate their movement. And they used to run, they would run these liberated zones. They would provide the services. They would run schools. They would run hospitals. They would hold courts where they would administer justice. So it was like a state within a state. And things began to change, I feel, after that massacre in 2010. Yeah. When suddenly you woke up just 4 years after what the Prime Minister said. The Home Ministry said, look, we have a serious problem, gentlemen. So let's get moving and do something about it. And which is when they started expanding the paramilitary forces, the CRPF, the BSF, all of them started to be expanded till a time that they were almost 500,000 strong. A lot of them were deployed in Chhattisgarh. They helped the state government, they bolstered the state government capacity to fight the Maoists. And they got, there's a friend of mine, a very interesting man, Brigadier Basant Ponwar, who, as a 1971 war veteran, he was at the jungle warfare school in Verangte. And I still remember in 2005, he was literally airlifted and brought into Chhattisgarh. And he set up this college of jungle warfare in the middle of nowhere. And I said, he's an exceptional man. I mean, at a time when people play golf and, have a nice beer in the afternoon, you had Brigadier Ponwar riding a horse in the middle of nowhere, and building this college of jungle warfare.
I think he's the officer who helps train the Cobra units of the CRPF, right?
Well, no, actually, he trains the police units. Okay. The Cobras, they have their own training thing. So he was doing it more for the state police formations and all that. So he helped greatly. So I mean, what I meant to say was that it is an all of government effort, the center, the states, all of that happened. And then of course, 2010, you had that very horrible massacre when the entire Congress leadership was wiped out. Jiram Ghati massacre, as it's called, where they literally, again, they carried out a massacre. Was it 2011, I think, or not 10? But it was after 2010, where they surrounded and massacred the Congress leadership. I think it was 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Memory's failing me. But this was the Maoists at their peak. They were, completely in control of central India. That red corridor was a reality. And I think what emboldened them was the fact that you had a very successful uprising in Nepal. You had the Maoists of Nepal who had beaten back the state. And they, in fact, then finally came out of hiding and they became a political party. And of course, they're now in power there in Nepal. So I think that's where the Maoists also got, a boost for their thing. Of course, they didn't believe in the political process. They planned to fight it from the, just like Mao had done, that they would surge from the forests into the countryside and from the countryside into, and finally encircle the cities and then take power. They planned to capture power by, I think, if my memory serves me right again, is in the 2040s. They wanted to raise the flag of the Maoists in Delhi.
Right. To sort of extend on that point, and before we come to what's happening in the present day, fighting Naxalites at the tactical level, how different is it compared to your regular army operation? And the reason I ask that is because on this podcast, I happen to talk a lot about wars involving armies. We talk about, long-range missiles, fighter jets, submarines, warships, high-tech equipment. But the fight against Naxalism sort of, I think, goes underappreciated, not just on this podcast, but also generally, widely speaking in the media, because I don't want to use that word, but I think it's less glamorous, if you can call it that. Let's take the example of Operation Sindoor. After that, you had all these fancy satellite imagery to sort of, for people to play around with and sort of talk about, hey, see, that's where the strike happened. You don't really see that really happening with the fight against Naxalism, which I think, based on what you've described and based on what I've read, is equally, if not more, dangerous and deadly. So when it comes to fighting cadres of Naxalism, when it comes to fighting a unit of Naxalites, what is it like for the troops who are engaged in it? How dangerous is it, and how does it compare, when I said, to a normal army operation?
No, very good question, Dev. And my sense is that it's the way the Maoists fight. They train like regular militaries or militias. I've seen their, literature. We've got some captured literature which I helped translate, and then to study their tactics and all that. These tactics are just like regular military. They believe they are a military. They are the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army. So they are the military wing of the CPI Maoists. And they train, they're organized, they drill exactly the way regular militaries do. So it's not like in J&K where you have, terrorists operating in small teams, two terrorists or four terrorists. Here they are organized like a regular military. They have battalions, which they call, they have battalions which are actually companies, right? They're 100 plus strong battalions, and they move like regular armies. They're very disciplined. They have good marksmen. They train exactly like regular army units do. So, which is why I remember when I was interviewing the survivors of that horrible massacre in 2010, one of the survivors told me this, and that's still stuck in my mind today, even after 15 years, is that I said, why didn't you guys form up and fight these guys when they were, I mean, that's of course a layperson's view. But he, what he said to me was that when the firing began, the CRPF guy told me, the survivor, that, see, we were deployed in J&K. Now, we had seen militant attacks over there.
Right.
We thought they'd shoot and then they would run away.
Okay.
And he said then the firing just kept intensifying, and then the numbers grew. Then we realized we'd all been surrounded from all sides. And then there was panic, and they ran, and and that's how they all were massacred. Normal thing is that when you come under fire, you immediately take positions, you dig in or you take cover, and then you return the fire. And a company is a very, very powerful thing. A company can dig in and protect itself for a week, 2 weeks even. So here is the thing of not appreciating how the Maoists were trained. They were trained exactly like regular militaries, and they were trained to encircle and then fight, and a lot of emphasis is given on marksmanship and all of that thing. So I think the beginning, early years were really deadly for the police and the paramilitary and the CRPFs, where they didn't understand how the Maoists train and how they moved. And plus, the other challenge is that they're not outsiders. They're not coming in from Pakistan or Afghanistan or something. They're all locals. So in a sense, they are locals who've been brainwashed, with an ideologically brainwashed, and they're tribals. They're all sons of the soil. They know the forest better than the policemen or the paramilitary guys who are brought in from all over the country. And for them, the jungle is a strange place. But for the Maoist guerrilla over there, he is from that place. He knows that village. He's prepared to fight. Whereas, knowing the thing, being from that particular forest, that's a big disadvantage for the paramilitary forces, for the police forces. And which is why it has taken us this long, almost 2 decades, to come to where we are today in 2025. And I think that was the big learning, that they said, it's a slow fight. It's not going to happen overnight. So you had to actually employ this strategy, which has been used in every counter-insurgency scenario in the world, starting from the Malay insurgency in the 1950s, which is clear, hold, and build, which means that you enter a place, you clear the area of the Maoists or the insurgents, you hold that territory, you build bases, you reach out to the people, you ensure that the Maoists are not able to move, like as Chairman Mao said, move like a fish among water. Guerrillas are supposed to move among the people the way a fish moves in water. So you're supposed to impede his movements by this clear hold build strategy, which is what the Home Ministry then did. And there was a lot of pressure on the army, Dev, back in 2010. I know, because there's a friend of mine who was handling this deployment of from the Northern Command of the Indian Army, because they wanted the Rashtriya Rifles to deploy into Chhattisgarh. And there was so much of pressure on the army, but the army resisted. They said, no way are we going to deploy into the Chhattisgarh, because then it becomes a black hole. Because you send one sector of the RR over there, the following year there will be a second sector, there will be a third sector, and before you know it, the Indian Army will be deployed in the northeast, in the north, in the center, everywhere. So that is a very, very wise decision the army made at that time. I think not enough credit is given to them, where they said, no, we are not going to deploy and fight the Mao. This is a police and a paramilitary and a CRPF operation. You should only deploy them. And I think that is a very good decision, because can you imagine this thing? Because then it just becomes unending. The army is not only fighting on the borders, but they're also fighting in the heartland. So it's a big challenge, and I think what we are seeing around us today, 15 years later, after that massacre, 15 years later, it's been a slow and a steady climb, and a very successful one at that, against the Maos and the Red Terror.
Yeah, right. I want to now turn to an event that took place in May this year. An event that was supposed to be a trigger actually for this episode, but then I think we had something else to discuss, so we sort of pushed this topic down the road. On May 21, if I'm not wrong, there was an encounter in Chhattisgarh, in which 27 Maoists were killed. Among them was the General Secretary of CPI Maoist, Basavaraju.
Yeah.
Want to focus only on this person right now before we expand into the larger fight against Naxalism. This, the government of India said, was the biggest kill in the last 30 years. Why?
The first time that a Maoist chief has been killed. There have only been two chiefs so far. There was Ganpati before him, and you have this gentleman who was killed in May. And it's very significant because if you have managed to kill the leader of the Maoist movement, and the leader is heavily guarded, the most protected, of course, right? Ganpati took voluntary retirement and he stepped aside, and he asked for Basavaraj to take over from him. Basavaraj is a hardcore military ops guy. He's from Andhra Pradesh, like the entire Maoist upper echelons. Now, he was trained by the LTT, believe it or not, in the jungles of Chhattisgarh. Not Chhattisgarh, but I think in the jungles of Andhra Pradesh, where the LTT had come down in somewhere in the late 80s, and they trained a few Maoist cadres. Then they were called the People's War Group, in using IEDs, improvising IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And Basavaraj was one of those people. He's an explosives expert. So it was that LTT training in the late 80s that helped the Maoists perfect a whole range of explosives, and they've improved on those IEDs making till the time that they could blow up even armored personnel carriers, heavily protected vehicles, bulletproof vehicles, and mine-protected vehicles. And all that. So there have been numerous such instances. So Basavaraj's killing was really significant because the Maoists that I have spoken with, surrendered Maoists, of course, in captivity, they said that the chief, at that time it was Ganpati, he always travels and he's protected, heavily guarded. He has a very crack team of Maoists protecting him. It's a detail of about 20-25 bodyguards at all times. And I believe that the people who were killed with Basavaraj were his bodyguard detail, and they probably died fighting when they were cornered. So this is a very, very significant blow that for the first time you've gone and you've killed the leader. And today we don't know who the leader of the Maoists are. It's been almost a month since Basavaraj's killing. There are at least 3 names that are doing the rounds of possible successors. But given the fact that the utter disarray in the Maoist ranks today, that after they've been decapitated, so to speak, there's no communication from them about who the leader is. And they're a very hierarchical organization. If you've studied them, that you see how they are driven by the Central Committee, which at one point, 15 years back, was 14 members or so. It then came down to about 15 members. And today, I believe there are just about 4 members left in the Central Committee, which is one of the topmost decision-making bodies of the Maoists. There are about 4 of them. Ganpati, of course, the former leader, is there. But he's really old and he's not in great health. You have someone called Tipiri Tirupati, whose house I've been to in Karimnagar district. And you have Kishanji's younger brother, Mallojula Venugopal Rao, Kishanji was this very famous Maoist leader who was gunned down in West Bengal, of all places. Very, very bright and upcoming, and a very hardcore Maoist leader who was ambushed and killed in an operation in West Bengal. So it's now down to these 3 old men, 3 or 4, and Misir Besra is the 4th. So one of them could be the next Maoist chief. Nobody really knows. But, it is a leadership that is really old. It's aging. And this is the problem of the Maoists, that they've not found young cadres. They've not found young leaders. At one point in the 70s and the 80s, when there was a lot of revolutionary fervor, you used to find a lot of cadres coming in. But today, the only new cadres who are coming in are the tribals. And there is a certain hierarchy in the Maos that all the top leaders are from Andhra Pradesh. Even today, the 3 leaders that I mentioned, out of the 4 leaders I mentioned, 3 are from Andhra Pradesh. All 3, incidentally, are from Karimnagar. Now, this is a district that I visited about 11 years back, just to find out why is it that 50% of the Maoist Central Committee comes from one district of then undivided Andhra Pradesh. But the foot soldiers are all the tribals. But they never allow the tribals to command the movement. Yes, the tribals are always the foot soldiers. The officer cadre is all Andhra Telugu. They speak Telugu, and it's very interesting when I've seen some of these videos that the Maoists have shared of encounters with the police forces. You will see 2 languages being, used. You'll have Telugu, people shouting orders in Telugu, and people shouting in Gondi. So it's 2 languages there. Yeah. So, but now it's now come down to literally they're back to the wall. 2025. They're that revolutionary corridor has become a dead end now. It's just a couple of square kilometers in Chhattisgarh.
Yeah.
And before you know it, as you said, the financial year ending, March 31st, 2026, the government wants to close the case on the CPI Maos.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of ironic what you said about the hierarchy for a people's movement, for there to be a hierarchy like that. So, yeah, talking about the government's mission to end Naxalism, I have some numbers, just some rough numbers. According to the government of India, in 2010, there were 126 districts affected by Naxalism. This number has come down by over 80% to 38 in April 2024. Violence has declined from 1,900 incidents in 2010, which was the highest in the history of Naxalism, to around 375 in 2024, which is a drop of around 81%. Now, I haven't been able to collate the numbers for the last, let's say, a year or so, but empirically speaking, because I work in the media and I come across news reports and I come across headlines, sometimes I give those headlines, I can tell it to you for a fact that I have seen more inputs and more headlines of Naxals either surrendering or being killed in encounters in the last year and a half or so, especially in the starting few months of this year. What's really happening, Sandeep, on the ground? And a very naive question, if I may, or a silly question. This seems very easy now. Every other day you have an encounter where you have an X number of Naxals being either killed or surrender or being arrested. If it was so easy, then what was it? What was making it so difficult in the past?
Well, the fact is that the presence of the security forces has gone up enormously. About 15 years back, in 2010. Abujmart was an area that nobody went into. Okay. It was like the no-go zone, right? And Brigadier Panwar used to call us that nobody's been there in ages. It's like one part of India that has been completely unsurveyed. Up outside of that one island, Sentinel Island, where you have the last centenaries living, I didn't think there was any part of India that was unsurveyed. But Abujmart was one such place. The Maoists were there. The entire Central Committee, the leadership is there. And today what you have is something like 200 forward operating bases that the police and the paramilitary and the CRPFs have built into this Abujmart. And roads have come up there. The Border Roads Organization is building thousands of kilometers of roads, crisscrossing the forest areas. So you have telecommunication towers coming up, mobile phone connectivity has gone up, roads, communication. When all of this comes up, then the security forces are able to operate very easily through the length and breadth of this red corridor, and the Maoists are encircled. And then you have informants coming up, right? When you have presence there, presence translates into intelligence gathering, where you have villagers coming up and volunteering. Look, there is this Maoist leadership here, or there's a camp over there. So I suspect that a lot of these recent successes have to do with a lot of ground intel that's coming in. And plus there's an exodus of Maoist cadres, as you mentioned. Last year there were some 900 odd surrenders, and this year there have been something like 700 surrenders in the last 5 or 6 months, which is devastating for a leadership, for a movement that's built on cadres. Their fighting strength is from 10,000 plus 15 years back. It's down to just about 1,500 people, which is just a little more than a battalion. So right now they're in survival mode. Their leaders are scattered. There's no clarity on who the next leader is. So it's every man unto himself. And they possibly, all they can do now is to, carry out a couple of IED attacks, delay, harry, distract, all of that. But it's just the writings on the wall for them. It's just another couple of months. And this is what you will see now is mopping up operations.
Yeah.
Where they're already in the heartland of the Maoists. They have nowhere else to go. There is no border that they can cross and run. And a lot of states are already starting to plan what they plan to do with all these forces that they've raised to fight the Maoists, which may not be needed from 2026 onwards. So there are some forces which have converted them into anti-communal forces and, those kind of things that are going on. But it's the end of the road for the Maoists. And it's not very unusual what's going on with them because, they've at the end of the day, you cannot go on fighting endlessly.
Yeah.
When your cadres don't see this movement going anywhere, then like any other movement, they start deserting in droves. Like any other political party or any movement which is just fighting without any clear goals, that the goals are nowhere close to being achieved. And plus all of the things that you promised them, which was development and peace and prosperity, now the government is bringing.
Yes.
The government is bringing the fruits of economic progress down to the people. It's pulling people out of poverty. And we can argue about this all day, but the fact is that a road can transform the lives of people like nothing else in this country. A good road will mean access to health, to education. It can bring in, relief. It can uplift the lives of people. And that is what has happened in all of these areas. And when that happens, you see a lot of people moving away from the path that the Maoists promised or that thing of oppression. So when the fruits of development start reaching the grassroots, that's when you see a kind of transformation. Today, why are they not getting any recruits? Because every recruit either wants to be part of some state government scheme or a central government scheme or is looking for a job, right? So when that happens, the movement collapses. And this has happened across the world. People join movements out of livelihood, not so much for ideology. It's the leadership that drives this because of ideology. They build up this thing of, victimhood and that you're being oppressed and you're being, suppressed and you're being exploited and all of that. But when the people see for themselves the fruits of that progress reaching them, when they see all your, the government schemes, the free food and, all of those doles that are being given out, which is a very good thing. I don't think it's ever happened in the history of humanity where 500 million people are being given free food. I mean, that's a big achievement. When all of these things happen, the movements start collapsing. And that's exactly what's happening to the Maoists. Yeah. It's been a generation, and every guerrilla movement, if you look at it, it has its peaks and its troughs. And today, I think the Maoists are on that trough. It's 20 years they've been fighting, and now it's time to wrap up.
Yeah. Right. We'll talk more on this topic, but after a quick break.
What is the coolest bike of the 2000s?
For me, it was the Pulsar.
Pulsar 180.
Pulsar 200, that one.
No, actually no.
So what else so the CBZ was the coolest. What else could you have?
Fiero.
Fiero
was also good.
That's
Fiero
one
also looked
motorcycle.
nice.
That's one motorcycle from TVS, which was so underrated. Hero Honda Sleek.
Why do you always pick the most boring motorcycle? 80s? What is our pick? What is...
RX-100.
RX-100 came in 1990, Rahul. Yeah.
What are you talking about? My uncle booked a Hero Honda CD100 SS.
In the 80s?
Yes.
That's a four-stroke.
Yes, you are right.
But wait. No.
Yes. He booked a CD100 SS late 80s. I'm talking about 86, 87.
ESD created the enthusiast
Yes.
in India at some level. Or maybe at a very big level.
Yes.
I think so. What about the Pulsar 135 LS?
That was a great
That
bike.
was a good motorcycle.
That was a great bike.
Yeah.
That
Really
had the
good.
jeans. That had the jeans.
Welcome back. Sandeep, we've been talking about the fight against Naxalism in terms of the military aspect of it. As in not military, but in terms of the use of force when it comes to using police and paramilitary forces, stuff like that. I want to briefly also touch upon the politics of it, because I think this topic is such that even though this podcast is about defense and it's
Yeah.
about, the militaries, but the topic of left-wing extremism cannot be talked about without the politics of it, because like you said, the way to fight this is, like you said, to clear, hold and build, right? So your forces can only do the clearing bit of it and perhaps the holding bit of it. They can clear a place of the Naxalites present over there. They can sort of secure the perimeter to hold it, but the building has to be done by the governments,
Yeah.
by the district administration, which is where the politicians come in. Also, this problem is something that spanned several states. So you have those interstate disputes. This problem is something that spanned several governments at the center. So you have different parties in the rule. I don't want to right now do sort of a blame game analysis of, party A or party B was better, party A did that wrong, did this right. But I want your perspective of what you've seen over the course of your career in terms of how important was the politics of it all to this movement, and perhaps the mistakes we made because of the politics of it all in the first place.
Well, I think the biggest mistake, if you ask me, Dev, was that we began economic liberalization so late in the day. And it should have happened much before, which should probably have been in the 70s. You probably wouldn't have even seen the Maoist movement pick up, so we were late in the game as far as liberalization went, and we moved only when there was no other alternative. We tried everything, including socialism, and by 91, the coffers were empty. And that's when they decided that we had to look at another path of development, which is now the only path as far as any political party is concerned. And today I can take a bet on this, that even if in the unlikeliest of scenarios, which is the left front coming to power in Delhi, they will continue the economic reforms that have been started in 1991. They have no option but to do that, because the kind of the fruits of development that liberalization has delivered to India, the unchaining and the unleashing of the animal spirits of Indian entrepreneurs could not have been possible in any other situation. And that is the larger political framework that I'm looking at when you're looking at this Maoist problem. And to see an example of a country that has not liberalized itself, that has not created a middle class, a vibrant middle class. You just have to look across the western borders at Pakistan, which has not had any kind of liberalization, which has not had any green revolution, which has never felt the need to do that. They are still today, after almost 80 years of being around as an independent country, they are still a feudal and in parts a tribal country, which is ruled by a very crooked elite, which is a robber baron elite, as they used to say in the West, the robber barons. The robber barons are the Pakistan military, right? So there is this example, and you have India's example, where we're trying to do all the right things. Because, how much ever people may scoff at it, the first lines of the Constitution are "we the people," right? So that has been the guiding force as far as any political party goes. They may not be fully committed to it, or they may not have the political power to commit themselves fully to it. But by and large, you see a very large percentage of the political parties looking at doing things that will benefit the people. And in this case, the fact that you did not bring in the infrastructure that was needed in all of these places, you did not build the schools, you did not build the hospitals, you didn't bring the roads or the infrastructure. I think those were the biggest failings that we as a nation have inflicted on ourselves. That, in the year, just about 10 years back, you remember when the first UPI started to be popularized. You had in one page, you had the government ads telling people how to build toilets and how to use toilets. And on the next page, you're asking them how to use the UPI, the Paytms and, the Bharat Pays and all that. So this is the kind of gap that you have to actually cover, that you not only have to build your toilets, but you have to also get people onto a, digital economy. So that's the kind of gap that we've not been able to build over the last couple of years. But now I think things are changing. There is a pace of reform that's accelerating. And it's not just to any political party. It's all political parties have taken this conscious decision from 91 onwards that they may differ on the way that liberalization has to be brought in or how it has to be done, but everybody agrees to the last member of parliament that this is the only way out. And I think that is, to my mind, the only political argument that you can make for the fact that the Maoists were as powerful as they were at one point, that the fruits of India's progress and prosperity had not reached the most distant parts of the country. The last man in the line, that the last man in the line was clearly the tribals of central India.
Yeah. Right. One more point on the topic of the factors behind the decline in Naxalism in India is the civil society support. For the longest time, and this especially is during the time when I was sort of growing up, I saw a lot of support when it came from urban centers. You had lawyers, activists, a lot of support from them for the movement. These days, you have a pejorative term to describe them. I don't want to use that. But you've also seen that support dwindling as well.
OGWs, is that the term you're looking for? Overground workers?
No, not really. I was looking for something to do with urban, the word urban.
Oh, urban Naxals.
Yes.
Right. I said it, they didn't.
I did not, But you've also seen that support dwindling over the years. What do you think has contributed to that? And parallelly, to sort of take your point of what you just described right now forward, has the support also declined on the ground in the villages as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking at it, like I mentioned in the beginning, that this was essentially a battle of ideologies, where you have the left parties, they profess a certain ideology. You have the far left that professes another ideology. The left parties, the CPI, the CPM, they want to bring in power, but through electoral means.
Yes.
Right. The CPI Maoists say that we want a violent overthrow of the state through force of arms. That's the difference. And that tells you how one side is prepared to do. The Maoists hold the CPI and the CPIM in utter contempt. They say these are, they're compromised because they're part of the political mainstream, right? So it is basically an ideological battle. And you will have communists of all shades. You will have, communists who are overground workers, who are in academia, intelligentsia, in the media, all of those things. And they will be the Maoists, the far left guys who are actually there in the fields or in the jungles of Chhattisgarh. So you had very, very bright individuals like Kobad Gandhi, he and his wife, Anuradha, who were, they're very, very bright intellectuals who were middle class and upper middle class even, who gave everything up and moved into the forests because they believed in the movement. And they said, this is the only way to bring about change. So it is literally a battle of ideologies. And I think the turning point was in 1991 when you saw the Soviet Union, which was the fount of that ideology, the leftist ideology, collapse. And between 91 and 2000, you saw communist China, which feared the same thing would happen to them. So they were at a crossroads and they figured out, what do we need to do now? Do we also become market oriented? But if we become market oriented, then, we might cease to exist because we cannot be communist and capitalist at the same time. But they've managed to do that. That's the most incredible thing. I think in post the Second World War, the most astounding transformations of a country has happened in China, which is a communist dictatorship. At the same time is a capitalist paradise, if you look at it. It's never happened anywhere in the history of the world. So I think the Chinese, in that sense, they studied what happened to the Soviet Union, and they figured that the Soviets bankrupted themselves because they started spending a whole lot of their thing on the military. The Chinese said, we're not going to make that mistake. We will become economically strong first, then we will become militarily strong. So you have Chairman Mao's, Deng Xiaoping, not Chairman Mao. Deng Xiaoping talking about hide your strength and bide your time. And then those 4 developments that China must do, the last of which was the military aspect, which Xi Jinping is now pushing in the last decade or 15 years or something. So China built itself into this economic behemoth, which it is today, by the end of this decade, they say China is going to account for 50% of global manufacturing. I mean, they've become a manufacturing superpower. Whether you look at automobiles or, fifth generation and sixth generation fighter aircraft, warships, submarines, all of that, they've pretty much got it in a very, very compressed time frame of just about less than half a century. So it was actually a battle of ideologies. And I think the Maoists were a little simple. They were a bit simple-minded folk, where they thought that what Mao did in 1948, we can do in India in 2004 or 2014 or 2024. Times change. Try showing someone today in 2025 a movie that was shot in 1948. I mean, I've had trouble in my previous organization trying to get my colleagues to watch Sergio Leone westerns. And they would say, I saw it because you asked me to watch it, but it's such a slow movie. I said, but it's a classic. It's like Sergio Leone makes cinematic classics. So try and get someone today to watch a movie that's shot in 1968, even if it's a classic, one of the spaghetti westerns. They'd say, no, it doesn't work for me. So why do you think our ideology that's, dates back to the 1930s and the 40s and all is going to work nearly a century later? So I think they're a complete bunch of misfits. They didn't read the room. They didn't read the country. And India is moving in a certain way, and the Maoists are not part of that. So, I mean, the beauty of India is that we are a land of multiple ideologies. You can have all kinds of ideologies and, yet be part of the mainstream. So I think it's only a matter of time now before the Maoists give up their ideologies and just join the mainstream.
Yeah, I guess so. Apart from the government's and the state's efforts, it's also as much as that it's a natural slow death per se for the movement. Right. A couple of last points. One, something that you talked about earlier on this episode, and something that I had on my notes anyway to talk to you about, was this time under the UPA government when the government briefly flirted with the idea of calling in the military, calling in the Indian army. And I don't remember about the army as much as I do about the Air Force, where there was a serious talk about using Air Force helicopters to bomb the jungles where there were Naxalites. Never ended up happening.
Thank God it didn't.
Thank God, yeah. I was going to ask that. So, with the benefit of hindsight, now, when you look back at that time when and this was a very, very serious debate. I remember that. This debate was happening. What do you think would have happened if India had gone down that path? And I'm not just talking logistics. I'm not talking about the Army's challenge or Air Force's challenge of maintaining the borders and also having to, have this battle in the center of your country. But I'm talking about the very idea of your own military fighting your own people on its own land. And this becomes even more significant if you think about the fact that we're talking about this when in the US you have when you have a protest happening in Los Angeles, where the US president has ordered Marines, which is one of the 4 arms of the US military, to be deployed in the city to quell those protests. So what do you think would have happened if we had also done this?
Well, I mean, we're very different from the Americans. Right. And secondly, I mean, like I said before, one of the best things that the military did was to stay out of this conflict. They said, look, it's not our battle. Do not deploy us for this. We are not meant for fighting insurgencies in the heartland. The Air Force was brought in. There was, but only for logistics. There was an argument that they should be used to as gunships, helicopter gunships, and to shoot the Maoists. But the point again is that how can you tell who a Maoist is? From the air, everyone looks the same. I mean, if you were just to do target acquisition, is going to be a problem because you see a large body of people in the ground. You would end up doing the same kind of mistakes that the United States made in Afghanistan, where they've massacred wedding parties, just based on the fact that their sensors picked up this huge group of people in a village who they thought to be were, planning some kind of a military offensive, or there was some guerrilla gathering or something like that. And they would just go and bomb and machine gun them. You would end up doing that to your own citizens because, at the end of the day, they are our own people, right? They may be a tribal, or they may be villagers, or they may stay in some of the most remote and inaccessible part of the country. But at the end of the day, they are our own people. And you can't unleash the Air Force and the military on them. All you can do is to send people on the ground. Police, of course, the police didn't have the capabilities then. They do now. You can send the police, you can send the paramilitary, but you certainly can't send the army and, God forbid, the Air Force against your people. And the Indian Air Force is deployed just once in the Northeast in the 1960s. But that was it. We've never deployed the Air Force after that. Because you would end up making horrible mistakes. You would end up massacring people. Because these are weapons of war. They're meant to kill large numbers of soldiers, to destroy fortifications and do all of that thing. If you use them against tribals, I mean, the most vulnerable of India's people, you can't tell firstly from the air who a tribal is and who a soldier, a Maoist guerrilla is. Everyone looks the same. And most of the time, they don't even wear those uniforms, right? For obvious reasons. And because that's how guerrillas operate, right? They merge amongst the people and they operate. So it's, in hindsight, it was one of the best decisions that we made, never not to deploy the military and all that. It had to be fought in the way it has been fought in the last 15 years. Slow, intelligence-based ground operations where you clear, hold, build, you bring in the roads, you slowly search, you take losses. There have been a lot of security forces who have died.
Yes.
Thousands of them, in fact, in the last 15 years. But that's the only way to do it. Yeah. Because what would have happened if you had deployed, say, large forces? You possibly would have, brought those areas under control, but you would have also probably created a new generation of Maoists with the kind of bombing and the strafing that you would have done then.
Yeah, exactly. I think what people sometimes argue the US has done when it comes to Islamic terrorism, because the kind of bombing they've carried out, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq, that's kind of led to that sentiment staying and led to more radicalization happening.
The US is up against ideologies again, and they've not won any war, if you look at it. Even the after Gulf Storm 1, which was in 1991, the US has never won any war. Look what happened in Afghanistan, where you went in to destroy Al-Qaeda, and then you ended up fighting the Taliban, and then you ended up, into nation building, which was never your original goal, and you ended up staying there for 20 years, and all you did was to replace Taliban 1.0 with Taliban 2.0. It's as crazy as that. So insurgency is a very complex phenomena, and especially if it is a state that is fighting its own people, then it becomes all the more complex. And this is, I think, something that the Indian state has done very well since 1947. Our model of not employing heavy weaponry, for instance, in Kashmir, except very, very rare occasions, nothing other than, a recoilless, a Carl Gustav has been used, which is an 84 mm rocket propelled round. Nothing else has been used. No artillery has been used. No gunships have been used, with that very rare exception of the Hill Kaka, this thing of Sarp Vinash in 2003. Very, very few instances have happened for the military force to be used. Yeah. But that's the way to fight insurgency. You can either do that this way, or you can do it the way the Americans, like you just mentioned. You go all gung-ho and you deploy gunships and, attack hepters against the tribals.
Right. So one final quick point, we're running short of time, so we'll just quickly wrap this up. Keeping everything in mind of what you've just said, the whole episode, everything that you've said over the course of this episode, is it then practically possible at all to overthrow any government of India except for the election?
Overthrow a government in India? You mean the central government?
Yes.
It's next to impossible, because for overthrowing a government, you would have to fight the military, you'll have to fight the paramilitary, all of that thing. So it's not as easy as that. That in the old days, you could march onto capitals and seize it and stuff like that. Here, it's nothing like that. You could possibly move into Delhi and capture a few suburbs. How long are you going to hold it? So a country like India can't be, power. You can't overthrow, an elected government. You possibly could do it in the United States, which is what we've seen in Capitol Hill a few years back. You could just, hold the entire Capitol Hill hostage and, have a civil war kind of moment there. But the United States is a very, it's a very interesting case study of what happened there in the past, if you look at it, where this thing of the right to bear arms, and this militias and all being created. I mean, that is something that it's a bit unsettling, for a country to allow such large numbers of people to carry infantry weapons around. But that's the way the United States was formed. I mean, it is a country that was born through force of arms, and it was a country that once again, resolved its differences through force of arms. So it's a very violent. It has a very violent history. In our case, we're generally a very pacifist lot, peace-loving lot. We've just seen one very, very violent phase of 1947, which is our birth as a nation state. And after that, we've never seen the kind of bloodletting. We've possibly seen it in phases in insurgencies, in terrorist movements in Punjab, in Jammu and Kashmir, and of course, the Maoist insurgency, where tens and thousands of Indians have been killed. But in the long run, I think we are a civilizational state, and there is a sense that we have been here for 5,000 years. So that common joke is that when you say 20 years, Maoists had their peak and their trough in 20 years. What's 20 years in 5,000? 5,000 year civilization. It's nothing. It's a blip. It's a little blip like that. So that's the kind of thing that we've been. So I think it comes from being the status quoist power. We're very happy where we are. We don't want any more territory than we already got. We are not a disruptor in that sense. We don't want to capture any country or overthrow any other. We are very happy with the way we are. I think that is India's civilizational ethos.
We'll end it there then. Thanks, Sandeep. Great chat as always. Had a lot of fun on this episode with you. Thanks
very much, Dev. Good to be back with you.
That's it then for this week's episode. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries of the passport. Bye-bye.